What's up, everybody? Justin Nault here. This is long overdue, and I could not be more excited about it because you guys hit me up all the time about this topic, and I'm so excited to dive deep with a real-life expert. My guest today is Will Kleidon, and he is the founder and CEO of Ojai Energetics, and I met him in Croatia, and he is a master of all things CBD, so I'm super pumped. Will, welcome to the show, brother.
Thanks. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, man, me too. I am so excited to dive into this. And I just want to give people a little tiny background. You and I met on a beautiful island in Croatia, and you gave me a bunch of dropperfuls of this wonderful CBD, and I picked your brain for a little bit there, but I'm really excited to dig in. So let's just give people a little bit of your background, who you are, and how Ojai Energetics happened, and how you got in this crazy world, man.
Awesome. Yeah. So back in end of 2013, I was looking for a CBD product. I didn't want to get intoxicated, but I wanted the benefits from CBD. I thought I had to get it at a dispensary. And so I was Googling CBD, looking for a dispensary, and it popped up on an Amazon banner. It's weird. I don't know how that's legal. And I clicked through and ordered it off of Amazon, fulfilled by Prime. So they fulfilled it, showed up in my mailbox. And I went, that's cute. Like, it's got to be legal somehow. So did some due diligence. This is pre-2014 Farm Bill. The ingredients were filled with synthetics. I couldn't get any C of A on the product. Turns out that particular product was coming from Chinese industrial hemp waste, filled with heavy metals at a level that would be considered EPA toxic sludge. Just disgusting. And so I thought someone's got to be making a clean product that like has transparency and done organically. Did some due diligence on how it was legal, and turns out no one was doing it. And so that was the impetus. I wanted to make something that I felt good taking and would feel good giving to others. And also I wanted to create a vehicle that could be a catalyst of symbiotic business and living systems on the planet. I'm a systems designer. I studied permaculture design and sustainable community development, and had always known how powerful the hemp plant was when it came to like multifactorial benefits for humanity and the planet, and really have just been scratching the surface and diving down the rabbit hole, but we learning more and more every day. We know as much as we know nothing. It's really exciting.
Yeah.
It's such a transformative plant. And so, yeah, that was the impetus. I met a chemist who said, I figured out how to solubilize cannabinoids. I said, oh, that's awesome. Can we do that without any synthetics or synthetically modified compounds? And he said, no. And I said, okay, well, we need to crack that code. We did. And instead of just going straight to market, I went and partnered with the leading IP firm globally, and started building and inventing for basically half a decade.
Wow.
We were the first company to have transparency on the website, and where you could actually link every bottle or product that you had to a third-party lab, C of A.
Mm-hmm.
We test for heavy metals, VOCs, pesticides, herbicides, cannabinoids, terpenes, and microbes per batch, and you can know exactly what you're putting in your body every time. Yet to see any other company do that on their website for every batch yet, but I'm sure there's some. But we started that and formed it as a public benefit corporation.
Yes. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah. So basically, it wasn't until the 60s that law changed, and companies in the public market were no longer, they basically were legally bound purely to maximize profits for shareholders. So if that means clear cutting the Amazon to get cheaper paper, legally they would have to do that to max. So essentially we created pretty recently, interestingly, a mechanism of creating sociopathic businesses.
Right.
Whereas back in the day, there was always, less so environmental because people weren't as aware of that, particularly in Western cultures, but there was always a social benefit. To be doing something that was causing harm and not benefiting people would be seen as insane. And then we flipped it more recently. So what a public benefit corporation actually legally binds in the charter the triple bottom line. And so it puts a soul back into the company.
Yeah.
So our charter is to holistically benefit all life forms, including the planet itself, through our product services, ventures and partnerships, et cetera. It's cool. I think it's the future where people are caring more and more about impact and doing good. And so etch that into the bones of the business. Pretty sure we're the first PVC in the entire hemp market.
Wow. And I mean, talk about like just selecting which company you want to support, you know what I mean? In terms of listeners and everything. And the pendulum's swinging hard that way, man. I wish that I would have known that actually when we were hanging in Croatia, because this totally random off topic, but I'm actually funding a documentary film called Sacred Cow, which is about regenerative agriculture and how it's actually like net negative in terms of carbon production, and how that's literally the future of like saving the planet. We need to get rid of these feedlots, yes, but we also need to replace them with something else. So, man, we could have nerded out on like sustainability and regenerative for a long time.
Yeah, man. Well, and that's a big part of so hemp, right, is an incredible dynamic accumulator, which is why you need to be growing it in organic and clean land, because it's really good at cleaning up dirty land, but you do not want to eat that.
Right.
Right. And then building polyculture systems and regenerative agricultural systems are actually part of so when we support all the ingredients, we know very much like the farmers and only use organic ingredients always. And we built out, we've got a biodynamic genetics farm up in Oregon. Before, there was a period where federally it was legal to grow hemp for flower, which is where the CBD is, and the other cannabinoids at a federal level, but at a state level in California, it was actually illegal. You would have to cut the flowers off, which is where the market is and where what people want, and burn it in the field. It was like archaic law. And so we had to go to Oregon to set up the farm, and it was a barren plot of land. Subsequently, we've got full topsoil, ecology-backed mushrooms, and developed about 200 new cultivars. And I initiated, co-sponsored, and we passed SB 1409 in California and legalized hemp production in California. And now I'm chairman of the California Hemp Council. We've got more bills in play. Going to get it for animal feed again. But yeah, regenerative ag is so important, right? I mean, the most important thing, right, to do is if we build our topsoil back, which we need undulates, we need cattle and buffalo, and to build that soil food web integrity, it sequesters 30% of excess CO2. I mean, that changes, we're good.
Changes everything. Yeah, it's crazy. It's so interesting to me, the climate change debate, where people just start rallying like this. It's the end of the world. We're going to end the world. I'm like, no. We might end the human species, and Mother Nature with her mycorrhizal fungi is going to eat up all the bullshit we left behind and fix herself. She's going to be just fine. We're the ones that'll be gone.
100%. And on that, like, we're patterns of nature, right? We're integral functions of Mother Earth.
Sure.
And like looking at the patterns, like where else do you have this like population bloom, massive consumption, seemingly parasitic, but also this like tendency for doing regeneration and care. And we're anthropologizing a little bit, but we're still parts of nature. And what you see is mycorrhizal fungi and caterpillars. And a mycorrhizal fungi initially starts out as a parasite when it links up to the tree. It will actually bloom the root mass and pull all this sugar out of it. Basically, just decay, and it parasitizes the plant. But then once it's generated enough energy from that, it links it into the internet of the mycorrhizal network and becomes a symbiotic life form. So it starts parasitic and then emerges as a symbiotic, benefiting both and all. And
absolutely.
So a caterpillar, right, starts as a parasite. It initially consumes, and it will nearly take out the keystone species of the environment. But then right before it does, it collapses and it goes into the chrysalis. It breaks down into this mush. And then these new cells start to emerge called imaginal cells. And they're carrying a new DNA frequency. And the old immune system, or the metaphor of humans, old operating system paradigm, sees that as a threat and kills it. And so they're persistent though. And thankfully, the way like Malcolm Gladwell talks about in the tipping point, the way our universe tends to work is like around a 14% is what we need for tipping and to going into mass adoption. And so around 14% of when the imaginal cells take up about 14%, all of a sudden the old immune system of the caterpillar goes, hold on, that's actually a future version of myself, stops attacking it and creates this protective barrier and enables them to recode them rapidly. And then there's still like rogue pockets, but at that point it's outnumbered, and it exponentially recodes, and it becomes the butterfly. And then it has to like struggle and push so it gains its wing strength. But then once it busts out, and it's not comfortable, right? But it's necessary.
Sure,
right? And then breaks out as a symbiotic life force. It becomes a pollinator, and it actually builds ecosystems. So it goes from merely taking them out, but what it's doing is it's amassing all this energy to then become even more transformative. And that's what I see us as a species. I think we are the imaginal cells, and we've hit the critical mass. Like, for example, McDonald's, right? Like feedlot, bad, we can label it, but consume, seemingly parasitic. But from that, we actually have all of this infrastructure that wouldn't have been built that we can now come in and use as vertical farming space.
Yes, exactly. Correct it.
Yeah, exactly. And come in as recoded, right? So the old immune system or operating system or paradigm that was more parasitic was building all this energy. And like the Department of Defense, like the internet, right? That was developed for war. It led to people realizing that there's more than enough resources for everyone on the planet with hard proof, and us to communicate and realize we're actually all one organism. We want the same things. We're interconnected, more similar than we are different. And so that's another example of like these initial points being transformed by us as a species into beneficial symbiotic systems. And so, and I liken CBD to be like the imaginal self food, because the cannabinoids actually feed. All of us have these systems called endocannabinoid systems, and they're responsible for regulating homeostasis for the entire body. And so that system's like the conductor of our body's symphony. And when it's fueled up, which we artificially cut our cannabinoid nutrients out through prohibition in the 30s, when we get them back in at the right dosage so it actually can turn on, the entire body starts, you feed the conductor of the symphony starts performing better. And there's preliminary data, pretty solid, demonstrated that healthy endocannabinoid system and cannabinoids actually increase neurogenesis in the multiple regions of the brain. So it grows new brains, and including the corpus callosum, which bridges the left and right hemispheres, basically prefrontal predominantly, which it also engages parasympathetic nervous system. So, right. So when we're running around depleted and in fight or flight or 4F response, we're more likely to see things as other. Whereas when we have sympathetic response on and more blood flow in the prefrontal, like what's fascinating is the cannabinoids actually increase brain production and propensity for us to be in the part of our brain that enables us to see things as interconnected and symbiotic. And so starting with the inner ecology and getting people feeling good again and back up online, that enables us to have higher propensity for flow state, which we're actually studying. We're doing the first studies on how cannabinoids interact with flow state with Stephen Kotler, who's the leading expert. He's on our advisory board, and we're getting the IRB set up right now. Yeah, so like with that imaginal, so that metaphor it's cool.
Yeah, it's beautiful, man. And it's so cool to think about, because it really is this. I tell people this all the time. They're like, when are things going to change? And what you're talking about with the butterfly, this really uncomfortable situation has to happen. And I'm like, well, I'll tell you when things are going to change. We're 10 years away from 100% of America's GDP being spent caring for the sick, for chronic disease. That's economic collapse. So the government programs go away, all this stuff is going to be really uncomfortable for a period of time. But then once we see that the pharmaceutical model, the mainstream medical model is not working, if we search for alternatives, people get healthy. There's a quick way to think about it, man. I mean, if you're out in the country, I mean, I played gigs all over the country, right? Like small town everywhere. So if I'm like in the middle of Des Moines in some little small town place, everyone you pass says hello to you.
Yes.
And then you're in New York and there's a billion people and no one even looks at each other. It's that sympathetic thing, man. So it's like, how do we, dude, I mean, we could fly off the rails on this like esoteric stuff forever, but I wanted to get into this CBD stuff because a couple things. There's so many, there's confusing terminology, even just in your intro, like IP, COA, so we can talk about certificate of analysis, this lab testing, and then really dig into, I mean, you know, cannabis versus CBD versus hemp versus marijuana, just like clear this up for us, man, because people are confused.
Cannabis, hemp, marijuana, right? So really, it's all cannabis. That's the real name for the entire varietal species. And just like tomatoes, you've got like beefsteak tomatoes and you got cherry tomatoes. There's different varieties of the cannabis plant.
Gotcha.
Some are psychoactive, meaning you get high, which is what would be called marijuana. And then some varietals, the THC is so low that you don't get stoned. It just has the micronutrients that our body needs to properly fuel the endocannabinoid system. And that's what hemp is. And hemp is really a legal distinction. It's any cannabis plant whose THC is below 0.3% THC. Biochemically, it's the psychoactive threshold is closer to 1%. And so some countries around the world, 1% is the cutoff. US is 0.3. On a botanical level, it's a varietal that anything above 1% THC does start to get psychedelic, whereas anything below is what we would call hemp and non-psychoactive. And so that's what, when people are talking about CBD and hemp CBD, that it's a non-psychoactive level of THC. Some products have 0, and then some products have a trace amount. And it's important for the optimal benefit of our system is to have a trace amount, not where it's psychoactive at all, but where it interacts. It's one of, so CBD is a cannabinoid, and a cannabinoid is a compound that the cannabis plant produces. Our bodies actually produce cannabinoids, and those are called endocannabinoids. And then the cannabis plant produces phytocannabinoids, plant cannabinoids. And our system and the cannabinoids are named after the cannabis plant because that's what led us to discover the system that our body has.
Interesting.
And CBD is just one compound out of 113 cannabinoids that the cannabis plant produces. And then the cannabis plant produces over 418 compounds like bioflavonoids and terpenes and enzymes and all this other stuff. And so CBD is like the trumpet section. It's got a lot of it does a lot. It's the highest concentration cannabinoid in the hemp varietals. Yet our bodies have evolved for millennia, taking in the entire symphony orchestra. So CBD with CBG and CBC, trace amounts of THC, bioflavonoids, enzymes, and terpenes. So all of them together work like a symphony, and that's the optimal fuel and micronutrient food for our endocannabinoid system.
Okay. So this is really making a lot of sense for me now. So endocannabinoid, I'm now realizing, is really just the same as saying like endogenous ketones versus exogenous ketones. It's cannabinoid body. Okay. Yep. Killer. So now when you're talking about this entire symphony, taking in the entire symphony, is that the idea of full spectrum?
100%. So full spectrum, the entire symphony. Broad spectrum is basically everything but the THC. So THC has been pulled out. And then isolate is just the CBD molecule. So one single molecule that's been highly processed and refined versus that molecule with 400 plus other compounds, that's the stuff that really works properly for our bodies in terms of endocannabinoid system optimization. The person who discovered the endocannabinoid system, Dr. Raphael Mukaleem, studied both of them, isolate with a full spectrum complex, and found that the full spectrum complex was vastly more effective. Which makes sense, right? One versus all of it. And they have a complex cascading interaction with our bodies. One will modulate this and the other will do, so that they work together in harmony. And then our endocannabinoid system is like the conductor of our body's symphony, and it determines which systems are most in need, and it deploys them to those systems in terms of triage. So it works down the list of, our stomach system really needs a tune-up, so we'll send the cannabinoids and the CBD to the CB2 receptors of the gut. And then the next time, it may be like, oh, nope, our nervous system needs it now, so I'll send it to the nervous system. So it's like the supercomputer of a car, making sure that the engine's firing at the right time with the timing belts, and everything is all operating at the right level at the right time. And the cannabinoid system is. It has receptors in every single system of the body at a systemic level, like the organs, down to the cellular level. So it's everywhere, and it's the conductor. It's the most important, and it was only discovered in the 90s. It's pretty amazing.
Unbelievable, man. And I love where you're going with this, because I deal with this constantly in the nutrition space, because people always love to debate the nutrition space. And like the calories in, calories out model that has failed us forever. It's like, this glucose from a Pop-Tart is the same as the glucose from a sweet potato. No, these are different systems with a different immunological response in the body, of course.
100%.
So that's great to know about. I mean, dude, you just really gave me a ton of info there on like full spectrum versus the isolates versus broad spectrum. That's fantastic for listeners. Really, really good stuff, man.
And so when I'm talking about CBD, I'm talking about full spectrum complexes that are high in predominantly CBD.
Now, is that, it looks like checking out your website and everything, is this all you deal in? You just do full spectrum, right?
We never touch isolate.
Beautiful, man. I love that.
Now, we will be coming out with broad spectrum formulas for those who, so the Collegiate and Professional Sports Dietitians Association actually brought us to Indianapolis. They want us to be the CBD of choice for all the athletes once water clears it. And so for them, it's basically like the Lindsay Lohan situation. They don't want to get blamed having a player who will use let's say high THC.
Right.
And, oh no, I failed the test because of the CBD. They can say definitively, no, you didn't.
So that's why you need broad spectrum.
Right. And so some people, they don't want to even think about the possibility of having a false positive. So basically in our products, in our elixir, the THC level is enough for optimization, and it's 0.03%. So it's a whole decimal point below the federal limit. It's like a poppy seed bagel with opiates. You could theoretically get a false positive on a drug test if you ate a poppy seed bagel. It's the same. We can't guarantee that someone won't. That being said, we've got law enforcement, pro racers, athletes who get tested taking high amounts and have zero issues.
Beautiful.
So it really comes down to the discretion of the customer, but we will be coming out with formulas that don't have any, just so that some people, they don't even want to think about it.
Well, that actually takes me into something. I was going to get into this a little bit later, but I want to discuss the legality of it. So we'll do legality, but then I also want to talk about this because what I love about broad spectrum is I did want to ask you about the safety and efficacy in children. Yeah. And I know that a lot of parents, I mean, even that 0.03, they're like, I am not going to give THC to my infant. Type thing. So we'll go there, but I just want to discuss the legality, because right now I think it's like what, Idaho, Nebraska, and South Dakota, that it's the only ones that aren't legal, I think, right?
At a state level, yeah.
State level. Right.
Yep. Yeah, they're changing. They're getting with it. So federal law actually now stipulates that they cannot block interstate commerce of.
So you can travel with these products.
Right. And so you've got an Idaho case where a guy was traveling through. It's really messed up. They're like he was driving through from Colorado, had a bunch of hemp biomass and material that looks like it's the cousin. You can't tell from smelling or looking at it, right?
Wow.
But when you test it, it tests as hemp. So they found out it was hemp, and then they said, no, it's not legal in the state. Yeah, definitely avoid traveling through Idaho. They're now arguing like the 2018 Farm Bill wasn't in effect when it was happening, even though it was passed, like going down to nuance.
Right.
So it's like the imaginal cell analogy, how there's still a few rogue pockets left of the old immune system.
Yeah.
It's changing. It's outnumbered. It's here to stay. It's a human right. It's the most important vegetable, arguably, that we could have, because it's the primary fuel source for the endocannabinoid system, which is arguably the most important system of the body. We look at it from a nutritional standpoint and historical usage. The cannabis plant is one of the first plants domesticated by humans. So we know for sure, right at when we went to agricultural from hunter-gatherer, cannabis was one of the first plants planted in China, where kind of the seed of agricultural civilization moved throughout. There's now evidence showing pre-Neolithic usage in Japan.
Wow.
High likelihood that we just don't have that full evidence. Now there's archaeological on the pre-Neolithic of some karma dating. Let's just start at agricultural. When you grow a vegetable, you feed that vegetable to the animals that you're keeping. That's what we do. As whatever you're not using, you feed it as green tops to the chickens and the cows and the yaks. So then the Scythians found it, and they brought it to the Greeks. And then the Greeks brought it to the Romans. The Romans brought it anywhere they colonized. They brought it to the British colonies. Then Britain brought it anywhere that they colonized. And the first cannabis laws in the U.S. colonies, where you would be fined if you didn't grow it in Virginia for the crown. It was literally the oldest printed cookbook on the planet is a Roman cookbook, and in it has a cannabis flower cooking recipe.
Wow.
And so people definitely also smoked it. There's evidence with the Scythians of how they just found further evidence. It was documented, but then they just carbon dated on these incense burners with CBD and THC resin. So they brought both psychoactive varietals and CBD varietals with them as they traveled. So that was just discovered. They brought that. And so there was definitely usage in that respect, but the primary consumption for the general population was indirect consumption. And it was fed to the animals. And so then it ends up in the animal products and the animal tissue.
Yeah, I think I've heard you talk about this, even in like chicken eggs and such, right?
Exactly. So this, I know the guy who's part of the study. They haven't published it. I think it's going to be so disruptive to a lot of products in the industry. But they found that hemp-fed chickens had up to 1% CBDA, which is what is a different cannabinoid that becomes CBD when heated, up to 1% CBDA, which is 250 milligrams of CBDA per egg.
Wow.
So if we look at our ancestors, that's just one egg. All of our ancestors
crazy.
were eating the chickens more than one egg a day. And then the cows, when you eat the cow and you cook it, you decarboxylate the CBDA into CBD, you get CBD that way. When you drink the milk, you get CBDA, not CBD. So our evolutionary, like for millennia, had this phytonutrient intake of high CBD, low THC, and then also lower quantities of CBDA and THCA, uninterrupted. It spread across the entire planet, and right. And then all of a sudden, in 1936, boom, we pulled it out through prohibition. So we're actually living in an era that is an anomalous period versus all of the previous epochs. Our ancestors were consuming it regularly as phytonutrients, and so we're in the anomaly. Couple that with the oxidative stress uptake of modern living, we 1-2 punched ourselves. So,
oh my God, yeah.
And that's one of the ways that the endocannabinoid system works, is it's like a force field, and it buffers oxidative events from landing in the body and throwing our bodies off.
Well, dude, and I think a lot of people don't realize too, when you say 1936, like the 1930s reefer madness stuff, like William Randolph Hearst, like hemp was used for a ton of shit that was not ingestibles, or on paper, car bumpers, like all this crazy stuff. And then you got this guy who
Diesel
runs these
engine.
paper mills. Yeah. So just touch on that for a little bit. It's used for tons of stuff. I'm sure you know this history much better than I do.
So that was like one of the primary drivers of this plant being brought everywhere. So it was documented as food, right? Like there's cooking. Mm-hmm. So the Romans brought that, and additionally, from a food standpoint and a nutritional standpoint, it's feed for the animals, and then we would get the cannabinoids that way. The fiber is the strongest natural fiber on the planet.
Yeah,
it makes ropes. So what's fascinating with this plant? It's just a weird plant.
It's an alien.
Yeah. If there was a plant that you would take to space, and we can touch on that later. This is the plant you would take to space, because it's got so many multifactorial usages, right? So basically, a hypothesis of what brought us from hunter-gatherer to agricultural would be the development of nets. So nets would enable us to go and actually fish, and that's why we would stay in one spot, as opposed to going to grazing and following patterns. All of a sudden, now you've got a steady food supply by a river. And so that technological advancement of the net would have led us to stay more sedentary in a population. Hemp nets were discovered right afterwards in the Chinese area, like 13,000 years ago. But the fibers it was the residue on the pots. And so we can't for sure say that it was hemp fibers, but then right afterwards, there was hemp fibers still intact in burial sites with big hemp colas and stalks buried at that spot. Wow. It was that important that they would be buried with it. So anyways, so we don't know for sure that hemp was what led that technology, but it makes ropes. It makes ropes that don't break in water, and then makes clothing that's antimicrobial, antifungal, and it's the strongest fiber we can make for materials of a natural fiber. And so that then got picked up, right? And actually got brought up in the Caucasus Mountains, and more Nordic countries picked it up as well and spread it all around. It was used for sails, for nautical exploration. So we go to this next epoch, we have agriculture, we got food, energy, and now all of a sudden you have more oxidative stress. But lo and behold, there's the cannabis plant right there, providing the micronutrients to buffer the oxidative stress associated with this new shift. Yeah. And then it goes to nautical exploration. So the term canvas comes from cannabis. And so cannabis comes from cannabism, which is a Hebrew word, which came from a Syrian word. And so they found hemp fibers in Israel. It's in the anointing oil of the Bible, cannabism, was mistranslated as sweet calamus, but no one used sweet calamus. Like that was total mistranslation. It was cannabisum, cannabis as part of the anointing oil. And then also the fibers were there, and they found residues of CBD and THC in Israel. So that element then spread out from Silk Road area, from Roman, British. Now we start moving into industrial. So now we go forward. We had exploration. Now we start entering more industrial. It was used for lubrication of machinery. The diesel engine was designed to run off hemp seed oil, biofuel. Now, as you go to this era, right, of industrialization, first industrial era, again, massive oxidative stress uptick, and people were very well documented using cannabis and had steady consumption of it. And so it was a major catalyst to go to another epoch, also simultaneously provided the necessary micronutrients to handle the change and oxidation of that. Flash forward into the second, it was there. And then all of a sudden, bam, it got cut out through William Randolph Hearst because it's such a strong fiber. It was very inefficient at processing. So lumber could be turned into paper much more efficiently than hemp because it's not as strong. Then 1934, the U.S. Department of Agriculture comes up with the corticating machine, which is a processing machine for hemp fibers that would have created equal production capacity to make paper as lumber. 1 acre of hemp is the equivalent of 4 3/4 acres of old growth forest. It would have annihilated the lumber industry. You have a renewable crop that takes a 40-day crop cycle that can 4x the production value, but you can plant it every 40 days. It doesn't deplete the soil. In fact, it builds the topsoil, and it has all these other uses. So
insane. That's insane.
Yeah. So that advancement, and William Randolph Hearst owned all the lumber industry and the newspapers, and he went, right. And so at the same time, DuPont patent law was different then. So they had like a very narrow thing, not on hemp, on tinsel from lumber. So they partnered up. And if we flash back a little bit, so the first flag was made out of hemp. All of the canvas and in terms of military is using hemp, and the U.S. military, even since Prohibition, had a clause that enabled them to use it, and they just had to import it for a period. But that's right after Prohibition. They opened it back up again for World War II, and they had hemp for victory gardens because they went, "Whoa, we actually really need this plant." Gave them the tax stamps to grow it, and then killed it again. Jefferson was quoted saying that the most patriotic thing you can do is to sow hemp seeds. And that it was amazing because it didn't deplete the soil, unlike tobacco, right? And so this was embedded in, and literally the articles were written, the first draft was written on hemp paper. It was it's embedded in the DNA of modern United States. And the Cannabis Plant was already here with the indigenous peoples and contact through South America, through the Spanish, and then pre that Chinese and potentially Chinese, but definitely Nordic European. They already had cannabis and they brought it everywhere they went. And so from a tactical perspective, it's the most useful vegetable, right? And so everyone
That's insane.
Yeah. And so now they went, how do we make this plant? There was zero taboo around. It was ubiquitous. Everyone grew it. Everyone knew it. In fact, higher THC varietals were commonplace in use. Mm-hmm. There's certain pockets that there was growing racist, so people from Mexico had brought it and they would use it. And so in Texas, there was some animosity. And then with jazz and African Americans, their usage of it in certain pockets, animosity, but it was actually like people would go out and have like cannabis socials. It was totally
having a good time.
There was zero issue for the most part. And so what they did was they went, how do we make this illegal? So they focused on the racism, ran through the newspapers, the Reefer Madness campaign, targeting the high THC cousin. Yeah. And it had nothing to do with the high CBD and then the fiber varietals. It was a misdirect. But they controlled all the newspaper, ran this campaign, and was damaging propaganda. But funnily enough, on an optimistic spin of it, had not have been pulled into the underground and just continued to go along as usual, we wouldn't be having this conversation. There wouldn't be this resurgence with this relegalization of, one, a culture of protecting it, and two, having these fresh eyes. It would all be generic pharmaceutical drugs, GMO. If it never got interrupted, there wouldn't be this injection of innovation that we're actually getting. So there's a benefit.
Yeah, I find the same thing with this push towards ancestral health and wellness, where it's we know that in the 1950s, scientists the sugar industry paid off scientists
to say that was bad.
So now there's this giant anti-sugar shift and everything. But that's crazy, man. The nets I didn't even think about, because the the doubling in the size, we've talked about evolution, the doubling in size of the human brain is like the big thing. How did this happen in such a short time?
Omega fatty acids.
Exactly. So you look at like 90% of the membranes of the neurons in your brain are DHA, which is an essential fatty acid. And these nets made a giant uptick in fish intake. That's the first I've heard of that.
And our bodies utilize omegas and fatty acids in the synthesis of our internal cannabinoids.
Wow. That is so interesting, man.
And so CBD lowers this enzyme called FAAH, fatty acid amylase hydroxy.
Okay.
I may butcher that, but it's FAAH. And it basically is a regulator of anandamide, which is one of our internal cannabinoids that's named after the Sanskrit word for bliss, ananda. Basically, when we have an oxidative event, our body will deploy the anandamide to try and buffer it. Think of it as like a supercharged antioxidant. Goes and deals with that, but then it also spikes FAAH, which then comes in and destroys the anandamide. So we created this artificial negative feedback loop in our bodies by cutting out these nutrients from the diet. But when we had a steady supply, the CBD actually modulated selectively the FAAH levels.
Wow.
And so we took that out, and it came in and just basically created this endocannabinoid deficiency, this artificially induced event that with the high fat intake, that would have enhanced the production of our cannabinoids. And then simultaneously with that intake of the CBD, that would have further enhanced the half-life and bang for its buck, so to speak, of that production of the anandamide.
That's unbelievable, man.
Yeah, cool.
It's so cool. And what I want to touch on here is, because I love that you were talking about how these products were ubiquitous and all this, and just talking about this basic human health. So what I want to dive into is this concept of safe for kids. So